And so we have finally arrived to Jerusalem. So this is episode 12 of Kings and Generals: The First Crusade, and I'm shocked that there's still more after Jerusalem. Like we've got a lot more to go. Which I don't really mind actually. I really like this series. I'm just wondering, yeah, some certain aspects, like just how far past the First Crusade we're going, because according to my list, there's like another crusade and stuff. I don't know. Either way, let's just get to this. Jerusalem's kind of been the main goal, at least the main spiritual goal for the Crusaders, mainly due to its importance, basically being such a great city for the, Abrahamic religions. And yeah, kind of you can see it as like the ultimate spiritual like prize of Christendom, right? So overall, I'm really looking forward to seeing this and refreshing my mind, because I said the last time we covered this was with the Extra History series, but that was a long time ago, and I don't really remember everything about that. So, yeah.
After the failure at Acre, the Crusaders regrouped and marched on Jerusalem, taking a vow to not distract themselves with any other side missions. The princes
Mission Impossible. But yeah, they kind of went on their whole side quest for a while there.
consulted local Christians and Muslims in order to pick the safest and fastest route towards the city, until finally agreeing with a Muslim guide supplied by the Emir of Tripoli, who led them across the coastal road. On one hand, this was the quickest road, which allowed for continuous naval supply, but it also had several narrow passes, ideal spots for an ambush, making it risky. On their first day, the Crusaders marched through one of those passes in single file, a place called Ras az Cheka, the face of God, but there was no sign of the Fatimid forces. On the 19th of May 1099, they entered Palestine by crossing the Dog River. On the next day, upon reaching Sidon, their foragers were attacked by the Muslim garrison, before being beaten back by a group of mounted knights. In fact, the local wildlife was so far the biggest threat to the outsiders, after a number of them succumbed to the venomous bites of some deadly snakes. During the following nights, the Crusaders banged stones together to protect themselves from the vipers.
Okay, locals gave the Franks tips on how to counteract these attacks, suggesting that a man who was bitten should lie at once with a woman with a man, and thus they would be released from all swelling and heat up. That's an interesting one. I've never heard of, okay, you've been bitten, get laid. That's a unique way to handle it. I wonder if it worked.
New strategy was adopted, where after several days of marching, the army would stop and rest for a day. Tyre, Acre, and Caesarea also showed no signs of resistance. The cannibalistic and savage nature of the Crusaders dissuaded the enemy garrisons, while the Crusaders didn't want to repeat the misfortunes of Maret. On May 30th, the Latins sent a scouting party to inspect the last major settlement before Jerusalem, Ramleh, only to discover that it had been completely abandoned. This town had both strategic and spiritual importance, as it featured the Basilica of St. George, a patron who the Crusaders hoped would guide them to victory. It is here that we truly see how far Raymond had fallen, as the Crusaders elected Robert of Rouen to garrison and hold the city. The power and influence within the crusade had firmly shifted from the southern French lords to the northern. On June 6th, the resupplied army set off towards Jerusalem and encountered a group of local Christians from Bethlehem who begged them to free their city immediately. Tancred was dispatched, leading 100 knights, who rode through the night and secured Christ's birthplace after the locals welcomed him with open arms. A huge mass was held at the Church of Nativity, before Tancred rejoined the main host, having raised his banner on one of the most important holy sites in Christendom.
Certainly.
Upon his return on June 7th, he witnessed the army already setting camp, men and women who traveled thousands of kilometers now standing in front of the historic walls of Jerusalem. The Fatimids' ineptitude allowed the Crusaders to cover 300 kilometers within a month, but at the cost of having no line of communication back to Antioch. The Crusaders were well aware that they had to risk everything, and now there was no way back. While many believed in the force of divine protection, the leadership understood that success could only be achieved by throwing everything they had at the walls of the Holy City. There would be no protracted siege like in Antioch, not even an encirclement. There would only be death or glory. Between them and the finish line stood massive walls, 4 kilometers long, 15 meters high, and 3 meters thick. To the east and west, the Judean hills acted as a natural barrier. The ground to the north and southwest was flatter, however those positions were reinforced by the secondary outer wall and several dry moats. There were 5 major gates, each guarded by a pair of towers. In the northwest corner stood a stronghold called the Quadrangular Tower, while midway along the western wall stood the Tower of David itself, made up of solid stones sealed with molten lead. It took no more than 15 men to turn that giant heap of rock into an impregnable fortress. The Fatimid Caliphate had just regained Jerusalem from the Seljuks the previous year.
Oh yeah, that's what I remember. Okay, so I remember from my last video, he did mention that they had recently conquered it. I'm on... Wait, let me get that one more time.
The Fatimid Caliphate had just regained Jerusalem from the Seljuks the previous year.
Okay, so they've held it for about a year, so it's still pretty new. And so I'm wondering if that would like affect the fortifications or whatnot, because I don't know the process of how they took it, but assuming it was a siege and an assault, I'm wondering if they did any damage to the previous Seljuk defenses and had to rally up a new one. Because I'll say the Caliphate so far, its resistance hasn't been the best. Like he mentioned already, they managed to like march all this time, even through narrow passageways, which seemed primed for attacks, and you know, basically almost showed up unharassed to the gates of Jerusalem. So again, I'm not sure exactly what's going on with the Caliphate, what internal struggles or issues they're having, but whatever it is, it's definitely affecting what I think they could have been trying to slow down the Crusaders, who, I'll say though, like I've kind of been impressed with just how the Crusaders have had like this constant issue of logistics the entire time of this series. Like they've had logistical issues in terms of like communication and whatnot, and yet they've managed to really make it as far as they did, and that's actually really impressive. Like I said, I've never heard or seen an army with this much logistical issues be dysfunctional and even successful, and a lot of it is also due to reputation. Now they're kind of coasting off by the cannibal reputation. You notice that? Like that really struck terror on everyone. So like I said, it's hilarious how even bad things like that can just contribute. So yeah, but like their game plan, which is they're gonna put it all on the line. They're not gonna try to prolong siege. They're just gonna go for it. That's interesting, though. Obviously, you could see how that could potentially cause a lot of loss. Again, I'm not sure about the complete strength of Jerusalem at this point. If the Fatimids have improved, what they've done with it, but I'd imagine this will be quite a bloody affair if they have at least somewhat fortified it.
Under the leadership of Vizier Al-Afdal Shahanshah, who believed the Crusaders to be no more than Byzantine mercenaries who were...
Well, that's not wrong. No, I'm joking. But again, it's that underestimation, right? How they all underestimate the Crusaders. And yeah, you know, for a while there, they did look like a complete mess. But you have to give it to them. They've managed to pull through every challenge put before them. And it seems like with the Seljuk Turks, they underestimated the Crusaders. Probably in part thanks to the failure of the People's Crusade, so they didn't take the Crusaders seriously, so they definitely had that going for them. But again, underestimating an enemy at all is it's never a good thing.
Easy to control. As for the garrison in Jerusalem, it was commanded by the Fatimid governor of Palestine, Iftikhar ad-Dawla. We don't know the exact number of troops, but it is said that the governor had a sizable contingent of footmen and archers, reinforced by 400 fresh Egyptian cavalrymen. He expelled most of the Christians living in the city and poisoned all the nearby wells, while filling all of the cisterns in the city. The circumstances were dire, but the Crusader resolve had never been stronger. One Latin chronicler recounts the atmosphere by describing Tancred as he stood on the Mount of Olives. He turned his gaze towards the city, from which he was now shepherd, separated only by the valley of Josaphat, and saw the Lord's sepulchre. Drawing a great sigh, he sat down on the ground and would willingly have given his life there and then, just for the chance to press his lips to that most holy church. The Latins had 1,300 knights and 12,000 soldiers, divided into many camps with barely enough cohesion to hold them together. There were now two remaining factions. The larger one, led by Godfrey of Bouillon, Robert of Flanders, and Tancred, moved to besiege the city from the north, between the Quadrangular Tower and St. Stephen's Gate, while Raymond of Toulouse and the southern French set up camp before the Tower of David, before relocating in front of the Zion Gate. Godfrey was now the definitive leader of the Crusade, and was even granted a holy artifact by one of his clerics to solidify that position, a golden cross bearing the image of Christ, which served as a standard, boosting the morale of his men. This new aura of adoration attracted Robert of Normandy, who switched sides and took his men out of the Provençal camp. And
yeah, Raymond seems to kind of have like a lot of L's this series, mainly because he wanted to be like kind of the main guy, and then just everyone between, you know, his feud with Bohemond, which didn't, you know, result well back in Antioch, and now Godfrey. It just seems like the poor guy. I'm almost gonna feel bad for him. Like, he's had quite the character arc, personally.
of the Provençal camp and marched up north. Raymond even saw some of his own Provençal bannermen abandon him. Apart from not knowing if and when the Fatimids would send a relief force, the Latins struggled with the lack of woodlands around Jerusalem, which were needed to build siege weapons. But then one day, as Tancred made his way into a cave to relieve himself during a bout of dysentery, he found a small stack of wood hidden inside. Once a few scaling ladders were constructed, the Crusaders launched—
Yo, that is... I'm telling you, there's divine intervention going on. Dude just happens to find a stack of wood in a cave that they just need, like... Man, God has willed it! Yes, God has willed this. But, yeah, I'm telling you, it's like little events like these that kind of amaze me most about the First Crusade. Like, just whenever an issue arises, it just seems to work out at the end. Man, these Crusaders, man, they were operating by divine intervention. They had divine intervention turned on as a stat.
their first assault on June 13th. The climb up the wall was extremely difficult, and a great skirmish ensued. On top of the battlements, some defenders used two-handed swords, using brute force to cut down the attackers, severing limbs and sending bodies flying down. Both sides sustained heavy casualties, but in the end, the first assault ended in failure.
It's not just about...
This defeat convinced the Franks to change their strategy, and both Crusader camps agreed to avoid further assaults until the necessary siege weapons were built, despite lacking the materials and craftsmen needed for siege towers, rams, or catapults. Sitting in the middle of the arid hills under the hot summer sun, with no drinkable water around them, the Crusaders began to suffer the effects of thirst. One chronicler recounted—
Man, these guys are always, like I said, like, I've never seen, like, the Crusaders, like, have, like, supply issues and, like, logistical issues the entire series. Every siege, they're always starving, thirsty, dying by natural causes. It's always like this. And yet they succeed. Like, I'm telling you, it is, like, miraculous in that sense. and just amazing to witness. I've never seen an army with this many, like, supply and logistical issues, and still they pulled through at the end every time, through every obstacle. It really is inspiring, I think. I don't know, like, it's just something I've noticed and, like, really enjoyed about this series.
We suffered so badly from thirst that we sewed up the skins of oxen and buffaloes, and we used to carry water in them for the distance of nearly 6 miles. We drank the water from these vessels, although it stank, and with that foul water and barley bread, we endured great distress and affliction every day, for the Saracens used to lie in wait for our men by every spring and pool, where they killed them and cut them to pieces. Some of the marsh water was so contaminated that men even accidentally swallowed leeches, causing a painful death.
Oh, that's awful. That's an awful way to go.
But right when all hope seemed lost, on June 17th, 6 ships, most of them Genoese, docked at Jaffa. Unbeknownst to the Franks, the port they didn't bother to secure was left abandoned. A messenger was sent out and arrived at the dismayed Crusader camp. The Latins then dispatched 3 squadrons, the first under Gildemar Capnel with 20 knights and 50 infantry, 50 knights under Raymond of Pilet, and finally William of Sabran with an unspecified but similar number of men. On their way to Jaffa, the first group encountered a 600-strong Fatimid detachment, which engaged them. Just when the Crusaders were about to flee, the second group under Pilet arrived and pushed the Fatimids back. The battered Crusaders arrived at Jaffa and feasted with the sailors, who welcomed them with bread, wine, and fish. The celebration lasted all through the night, with no sentries posted.
Oh snap.
And as a result, the Latins woke up and saw a large Fatimid fleet surrounding the 6 western vessels. The port was overrun before everyone made their escape. Still, the majority made their way back to Jerusalem, carrying supplies and siege materials.
Okay, that worked out, thank goodness. Okay, so the Fatimids now seem to be getting their act together in terms of just attacking the Crusaders, so I'm wondering if they are sending a relief force. So far they seem to be mobilizing and actually attacking back, so... yeah.
In the following days, some of the Christians expelled from the city met up with the princes and advised them on where to find wood. The leadership sent out squads who cut it down and transported it back on camels, starting the construction of several siege engines. The construction itself led to yet another confrontation after one of the key engineers defected from the Provençal to the northern camp. Morale was so low that Raymond had to pay his own men extra wages just so they would stay, but tensions only rose. One of the main arguments that followed the Crusaders since Antioch was who was going to be the Lord of Jerusalem. The princes disagreed on who to crown as king, while the priests argued that it would be sinful to raise a king over God's patrimony, suggesting that the city should be governed by the church and protected by a holy order. Chronicler and Crusader Raymond of Aguilera described this situation as such. "We now called a meeting because of the general quarrels among the leaders, and specifically because Tancred had seized Bethlehem. There he had flown his banner over the Church of the Lord's Nativity, as if over a temporal possession. The assembly also posed the question of the election of one of the princes as a guardian of Jerusalem, in case God gave it to us." In between devotion and desperation, the hard work continued, as the Crusaders built 2 of the finest siege towers of the time.
Yeah, that's the thing though, it always comes back to it, because while at the same time the Crusaders are trying to, like, obviously get to Jerusalem and fulfill the goal, there's always that self-interest, like, they want their own principalities, they want their own states and crusaders, kingdoms, as we know, which become founded, and it's like, there's that interest among the princes of gain, and some of these people even sold off their possessions, right, to come, and even their holdings back in Europe to be there, so that there's always that, like, we want this. And again, Jerusalem is such a powerful place to hold that it's no wonder, right, that the discussion of who the heck is gonna rule it is coming back into play. And It is interesting to see the conflict with the church, because the church is all like, you know, instead of treating it like some conquered territory, it should be like more respected and more governed by like the church. So that's an interesting discussion. We do know that eventually Jerusalem becomes a kingdom with its own king and whatnot, but it is interesting because that is a that's an argument that I think makes sense, you know?
Each one was 3 stories tall, with wheeled platforms designed to push up against a wall, protecting its passengers from projectiles. The towers were covered by interwoven branches and animal hides. Godfrey's tower was even designed in a way that it could be disassembled in parts and repositioned on another section of the wall if needed. Additionally, the Crusaders built a huge ram with an ironclad head, several catapults, numerous scaling ladders, and a few protective screens. Meanwhile, Remor ordered his soldiers to fill the moat in front of the Zion Gate with rocks, a process which took 3 days and nights. On the other side of the walls, the Fatimids maneuvered their own catapults to the sections of the walls the Crusaders intended to hit and began to bombard them. The barrage slowed down the Frankish progress, so in order to intimidate the defenders, a noble Muslim captive was beheaded in full view of the Tower of David. The Crusaders also caught a spy relaying messages in and out of the city. After questioning, the man was catapulted to his death as he crashed on top of the stones piled in the moat. The garrison responded to this psychological warfare by fixing crosses on the battlements, which they then spat and urinated on. A rumor began to spread that this was an indication that the Muslims were desecrating the Holy Sepulchre. In early July, one of the
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, the psychological brutality, it's always something I take notice. Especially in the Crusades, just like with the constant, like, we're just gonna rally all these guys and just murder them in front of the cities and torture them. But again, like, if there's anything that the Crusaders have is that overwhelming zeal, so them getting the idea that they're defiling the Holy Sepulchre might actually come back to bite them if they're giving that impression, because that would just make the Crusaders more angry and like already ravenous. Like every siege ends with a bloodbath, like you know, so far in this series every siege ends up like it's just a complete bloodbath for anyone inside the city. So probably giving the Crusaders that kind of idea is just like not gonna bode well once they get in, you know.
Clergyman reported yet another vision of Bishop Adhemar, who allegedly instructed the Crusaders to lead a religious procession around the city walls with bare feet.
Yeah, this is very reminiscent to the book of Judges, where Joshua and the Israelites marched around the city 7 times, then shouted in the city of Jericho, and then the walls fell. Like that, you know, that's not lost on me. And I like how Adhemar has just become this figure that everyone is just having visions of and like kind of like calling in, like, you know, like Saint Adhemar and whatnot. I don't know, that's such an interesting thing. So yes. And again, it is just a great morale thing, because the common soldier is like driven by religious things, and we've seen just how religious processions and things like fast and prayer seem to really rally the morale of the common soldier and knight. So this ain't such a bad thing, especially in front of the holy city itself, like where these people already are, you know, like under the mindset that God is so strong with them. It kind of is just working really well. So there's a psychological component even to these like religious practices that so far have been really beneficial towards the Crusader cause.
Huge mass of people passed along the walls, blowing trumpets. They were bombarded by the garrison, which resulted in many men, especially priests, being pierced by arrow fire. Desperate, yet full of bloodlust and determination, the Crusaders readied themselves for another assault. On July 14th, as daylight broke across a reddened sky, a horn cried out through the camp, announcing the beginning of the attack. To the dismay of the Muslim garrison, Godfrey managed to fool them by building his tower in different locations for the past 3 weeks, staring directly at the quadrangular tower. During the night before the assault, he had it reassembled and moved to St. Stephen's Gate, which was one of the greatest technological achievements of the era.
Okay, Godfrey. He might just get the MVP award with the way he's duping people. Yeah, Godfrey seems to be like the rise of the new guy, right? He's the leader, everyone's defecting to him, and even this move is quite impressive. Like, again, managing to pull all that off in a night, like, alright, I see you, Godfrey.
On the northern front, for hours, many brave men pushed the massive ram towards the wall, inch by inch, until they used it to tear down a part of the wall. The defenders then poured fire kindled from sulfur, pitch and wax, setting it ablaze. The Latins frantically threw the remainder of their water supply, trying to save the ram, but only charred beams remained. But then, in an almost comical reversal, the Crusaders lit the construction on fire again, so that it would clear the path through the breach.
Okay, the fight was so intense that it even included civilians who did what they could to defend the walls. They are given a particularly interesting scene from one of the chroniclers. 2 women were trying to hex one of our catapults, but a stone powerfully flung from the same machine struck the woman as they sang, along with 3 little— oh my goodness, 3 little girls. Their souls cut down, the incantation ceased. My goodness. Really using incantations and stuff, like, man, brutal, man. Just brutal. I love that. It's like, okay, it's on fire, let's just set it back on fire and throw it into it. I love that logic. Honestly, like, this crusade is so off the walls. At some points, it's almost like actually, I've kind of been calling it comical, but also incredibly sad when it does get really brutal and violent. It's like the greatest black comedy ever. You know what I mean?
Seeing this, now the Fatimids started throwing buckets of water, but before long the ram was gone, and the breach was now fully open. On the southern side, Raymond had far less success, since the majority of the garrison was positioned in his location. That included 9 out of the 14 catapults at the garrison's disposal. Big rocks were hurled at them, alongside hails of arrows. As the siege engine came closer to the walls, flaming pieces of wood were also added to the barrage, after being wrapped in pitch, wax and rags. Many of the projectiles had nails attached to them, so they would stick in whatever they struck. The fortifications, ditches and defenders proved to be an unassailable obstacle, and the tower had to eventually pull back. By the end of the first day, the news was mixed. But one thing became clear: their enemies had just as much determination as the Crusaders did. On the morning of the 15th of July, the onslaught continued. Raymond's tower approached the wall again, and it was once more repelled by a barrage of catapult fire until it started to burn and collapsed. The other tower, bearing the Golden Cross standard and filled with men including Godfrey of Bouillon himself, moved slowly towards its destination, just one well-placed shot away from collapsing on top of the Crusaders and all of their hopes. The garrison fired upon them with slings, and hurled flaming projectiles dipped in oil and grease, setting some of the men and portions of the tower on fire. Indeed, Godfrey nearly met his death when a stone was hurled and instantly killed the soldier standing next to him. The Duke then grabbed his crossbow and fired back at the crew manning the catapult. The tower managed to prevail, thanks to how well it was built, since most of the fire was repelled by the animal hides, allowing it to make its way to the wall. Once they got close and had the height advantage, the Crusaders started returning fire, clearing the wall of enemy archers. They were no more than a meter away when the Fatimids used their secret weapon, reserved only for the direst of circumstances: Greek fire.
Oh my goodness.
Several flaming—
I keep forgetting they have Greek fire. That's not just a Roman thing. Like, mainly it's kind of associated with the Byzantines, but Yeah, I keep forgetting that the enemies have possessed the same thing, and oh my gosh, Greek fire. Such an OP effective weapon. So far, from all the times it has appeared in these videos, it's never fully been countered. So, And besides, it seems like this siege tower seems to be kind of the pivotal thing on Godfrey and the defender side. So if it goes down, like, how would they rebound from that? If it goes down, you know, before they're able to fully utilize it, I guess.
Projectiles were hurled at the tower, producing flames that could not be put out by water. But when the commander of the garrison expelled his Christian citizens, he also gave the Crusaders the antidote.
Oh!
Prior to the battle.
Oh, snap! They have an antidote to Greek fire? That's insane. Okay, that's quite the plot twist. That caught me off guard. Okay, so, like, yeah, I've heard the famous telling of Greek fire. Water can't put it out. It keeps burning. So I've never heard of this antidote, but apparently the Christians that they expelled, boy, did that come back to bite them, huh? But apparently there's an antidote. I'm wondering what it is, like, I know that the component of what Greek fire is has been lost to, like, history. Some people aren't sure of how it was made, because it was just that guarded of a secret. So I'd imagine the antidote would be too, right, in a sense? Or whatever the counter is to it.
The princes were given a crucial piece of advice. Greek fire could be neutralized by vinegar, so they made sure to fill many wineskins with the liquid, which was now poured over the Fatimid secret weapon.
Holy crap, vinegar. That's awesome. That's an awesome thing.
Either due to a combustible substance being mishandled, or due to Crusader fire, a nearby guard tower was lit ablaze and produced so much smoke that no defender could stand near it. In this crucial moment, Godfrey ordered his men to prepare and cut loose one of the skins that held the tower together, unleashing a makeshift bridge. The Crusaders were on the walls of Jerusalem at midday. Ludolf of Tournai and his brother Engelbert were the first men to set foot in the Holy City, rushing forward and establishing a foothold. Shields were raised, and in the commotion, a squad of men underneath brought a scaling ladder and attached it to the same section of the wall. At that point, the Muslim garrison panicked and lost all cohesion, every man fleeing for their life. The Crusader reputation preceded them, and all it took was a single breach for the entire city to fall.
Dang. Yeah, again, the Crusaders, their reputation is quite infamous at this point in sieges, right? That the moment they're in, it's like, holy crap, just get out, you know?
News spread to the southern front, where Muslim defenders abandoned their posts, some even jumping from the walls to their death, and Raymond pressed the advantage as he entered the city. The First Crusade had achieved its goal, but instead of celebration, what they proceeded to do was unspeakable. This was the greatest victory in the history of the Crusades, and it culminated in one of the most atrocious acts committed in the medieval era. Eyewitness Raymond of Aguilé reported, "With the fall of Jerusalem and its towers, one could see marvelous works. Some of the pagans were mercifully beheaded, others pierced by arrows plunged from towers, and yet others, tortured for a long time, were burned to death in searing flames. Piles of heads, hands, and feet lay in the houses and streets, and men and knights were running to and fro over corpses." Many Muslims fled to the Temple Mount.
I'm telling you, the Crusaders managed to turn every siege into a bloodbath. Like, this is no different. Like, it's so brutal. And also just the medieval era is brutal, but man, the Crusaders just had no chill. Whenever they won a frickin' siege, they went all in with killing and desecrating and just anything they could do.
While crusaders like Tancred and Gaston of Bîme gave a group of men stranded on the roof of the Temple of Solomon their banners for protection. But once discovered by other crusaders, none were spared. To quote Raymond, "After a very great and cruel slaughter of the Saracens, of whom 10,000 fell in that same place, they put to the sword great numbers of Gentiles who were running about the quarters of the city, fleeing in all directions on account of their fear of death. They were stabbing women who had fled into palaces and dwellings, seizing infants by the soles of their feet from their mothers' laps or their cradles, and dashing them against the walls and breaking their necks. They were
Oh my gosh, dude. The Crusaders can't ever just let, like, something happen peacefully. Like, we have the city now. They're like, okay, now let's go commit atrocities. Let's just kill. I mean, granted, like, sieges, obviously, in the past, it's not just a Crusader thing. Sieges in the past were just brutal. And, like, we've seen this happen a lot, but it's still just, like, awful, man. You know? Yeah, it really brings down the mood, like, yes, we've done it, like, you've done it, guys, and then they just proceed to start killing everything. I'm telling you, it's like, it'd be funnier if it wasn't, like, kind of, like, sad and, like, disturbing to listen to. Like, the First Crusade is, like, it's like a black comedy, that it feels a little, like, I'll laugh at certain parts, like the People's Crusade, and then other parts it's just like, oh, like, it's a bit too much, you know? You guys took it too far. But then again, the world was brutal, especially the medieval world. Like, that was just how things were. It's awful, but oftentimes history is kind of an ugly thing, you know?
slaughtering some with weapons or striking them down with stones. They were sparing absolutely no Gentile of any place or kind. The only Muslim inhabitants who survived seemed to be the garrison commander and the elite cavalry who locked themselves in the Tower of David and later negotiated terms with Remor. As for the spoils, the chaos and emotions gave way to a systematically brutal approach. After this great massacre, they entered some of the homes of the citizens, seizing whatever they found in them. It was done systematically, so that whoever had entered the home first, whether he was rich or poor, was not to be harmed by anyone else in any way. He was to have and to hold the house or palace and whatever he had found in it entirely as his own. Since they mutually agreed to observe this rule, many poor men became rich. Tancred personally entered the Temple of Solomon and left with all the gold and precious stones he could carry. Once again, after discovering that many inhabitants had swallowed coins before their demise, many began to disembowel the thousands of bodies on the streets, creating a revolting stench. With their hands still laden with gold and covered in blood, the Latins rejoiced at the sight of the Holy Sepulchre, singing songs and thanking their Lord for his protection. This is the point where most narratives retold their adventures, and even the most biased takes couldn't ignore the severity of the crimes committed in the aftermath of the victory. On the next day, a few remaining Muslims were tasked with dragging the dismembered corpses out of the city, while Commander Iftikhar ad-Dawla surrendered the tower and was safely passed towards the nearest Fatimid stronghold, the southern port of Ascalon, the site of the last battle of the First Crusade.
At Wells Fargo.
And tomorrow we'll be covering the Battle of Ascalon. So overall, yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow.